Hi, everybody. Welcome to Lurking for Legends. We're a live video cast that speaks to people from all walks of the publishing world. My co-hosts Christy Stratos and David Kelly and myself encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guest during the show or comment on what you hear. And tonight, Lurking for Legends is excited to have with us JF Garrard. Welcome, JF.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Well, you're most welcome. Before we get started, I want you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and everything that you do.
So my name is JF Garrard. Stands for Jeannie von Garrard. I do a whole bunch of stuff. So I write short stories and novels, mostly in the horror, sci-fi, fantasy, so speculative fiction. I'm also an editor for Ricepaper magazine. So I help them with a lot of the editing and I help them publish anthologies. And as well, I'm one of the co-presidents for the Canadian Authors Association, where we plan a lot of literary events. Well, of course, online right now during the pandemic, on Zoom for people who want to learn how to write.
So literary events, expand a bit about the literary events. What exactly is that? And is that something countrywide, or is it just? I know you said we're all.
It's international. I mean, whoever wants to they can register. But I mean, initially it started off before the pandemic. Like we would meet in person downtown Toronto, and people would come, and we would have guest speakers. So we'd talk about like book marketing, for example. So we spend 2 hours with a few guest speakers talking about marketing, and then people could ask questions and stuff like that. Another one we did was a poetry workshop where people sit down and then there's like a moderator and then they teach us how to write poetry. They do exercises with us. And then another one is about publishing, like whether what kind of routes are available, whether it's traditional publishing, when you find an agent and gets things published, or self-publishing where you do it all yourself. So what's the difference, how to get there for anyone that's interested in writing and how to publish their works. So the Canadian Authors Association, it's actually a national organization in Canada, but I run the Toronto branch with my co-president Lee Parpart, who is also an editor at Iguana Books in Toronto. But I know there's other branches too. I'm trying to think where else there, like, it depends, right? Like it's a voluntary organization. So in a way, a lot of things are as good as the volunteers. Same thing with Ricepaper, it's all run by volunteers, right? So it depends on who's running it. Like Vancouver has a branch for Canadian Authors Association, and I don't think where else. There used to be an Alberta branch, but it collapsed because there weren't enough people volunteering. I think that Peterborough has another branch there. So it's all over the place, but it depends on who's volunteering. So.
I noticed you kind of like started off, well, I think you still work in nuclear medicine. Is that correct?
I gave up my license. But yeah, I started out, my background is in nuclear medicine. So when I was younger, I remember, I was in high school and you get that form, right, to fill in for university. And I told my mom, you know what, I think I want to do English literature. And she said, you absolutely not. We're not supporting you if you're going to do that. So you should do computer engineering. And I was like, I like computers, but I'm not computer engineering material. But I love science. So I was like, that's fine. Because they were like, oh, we want a doctor, of course, right? So nuclear medicine fell way short of being a doctor. But nuclear medicine, you won't encounter this department unless you're quite ill. So a lot of the tests we do are for cardiac, for heart scans. We get people run on a treadmill, and then we inject radioactive isotopes into them, and then we scan their heart. Or bone cancer, and we scan the whole skeleton.
Right.
My favorite is GI reflux, where we feed people radioactive sandwiches, and then we watch the sandwich go down into their belly. I mean, after a while, I kind of started getting paranoid about the radiation, because you can only be exposed to so much radiation, and then
yes, it's cumulative.
You get a desk job, right? And I had to get a desk job once or twice, and I was like, yeah, maybe, I don't know if it's worth the money, after a while. So I did something else. So I entered working, or I remained at the hospital, but they were looking for a project manager, what they call a transition manager, to sort of expand the imaging center. So they want someone that want to do something different, but also had a background experience in labs and nuclear medicine. So I went into that area. So I still work in healthcare. So writing for me is not my full-time gig. I wish it was, but I am not rich enough for that. But you know, I do like my job in healthcare. I feel like I'm making a little dent in the system. I mean, let's be honest, like the healthcare system is gigantic. So I feel like I'm a little wheel doing something in it. So, you know, I like what I do, and I like writing too, but writing does take a lot out of me. I don't think people realize how much energy it takes to write a story, even a short story. Like you're working on it for like months, and then people read it in 5 minutes and they're like, that's it? Can you do better? And you're like, oh my God, that took me 5 months. So yeah. So writing is something I enjoyed as a child, and I remember, and yeah, when I applied for the English lit thing, the around that time, the only sort of Asian writer that was visible at that time was Evelyn Lau. So she was a poet in Vancouver. She's a poet laureate in Vancouver a while ago, but she wrote a biography, right, talking about her running away because her parents were pressuring her to become a doctor. And then my mom's like, I see, you want to be a prostitute and write about it. I was like, Mom, that is Evelyn's story. I do not want to be a prostitute. I just want to be a writer. So, you know, it's something different. But anyhow, it wasn't, arts is not something that was supported. But I sort of understand. I mean, as a new immigrant family, it's very risky to take the arts route. I mean, there's only so many J.K. Rowlings. It's like winning the lottery to be J.K. Rowling, really. One J.K. Rowling, there you go. I mean, even Margaret Atwood, I mean, you know, has a lot of success now, but I mean, she gave away all her rights and stuff for Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that, right? Like, it's such a competitive field, writing, because there's no barrier to entry. Anyone can start writing. Everyone has a story, right? So it's just how, you know, how do you let readers find your story? So it's a constant pushing, a constant struggle. So I'm sure you gentlemen understand the constant struggle.
It's a risky. You don't have to be an immigrant to have to be risky. It's risky for all of us involved here. It's a tough way to be a sole income person or the breadwinner of the family, especially as an independent artist, for sure. But
now I remember during one of the seminars, there were some romance writers and they were writing full time. And I was like, how do you do it? They're like, our husbands let us. And I was like, okay. So I went home and I asked my husband. He's like, isn't that nice? No.
So just something you touched on just there a little bit. I mean, more recently, we're kind of seeing more diverse voices appearing in speculative fiction. Do you feel that the situation as a whole is improving, or do you think there's still a long way to go, or a bit of both?
I think there's still a while to go. I mean, I finished a novel, and it's a speculative fiction novel just before my mother died, actually. And then I've been shopping it around. But shopping it around now, I mean, I have more street cred now than I had back in 2014 when I first published. But it's still just as hard to get an agent. It's still it's a lot of networking that you have to do. You know, it's still a lot about who you know and building up your resume still. So I think it's just as hard as it was like in 2014. Yeah, I mean, it's also become a more global market too, right? So diversity here, you're also competing against translated work as well, right? So it's like, I don't know, it's a tough industry. It's a double-edged sword, this diversity stuff as well. Like, same thing with self-publishing. I mean, before it was really hard to get published. Oh, okay, now everyone can publish. But then you're talking about over 1 million books a year just coming out of the US that are self-published. So how do you get people to read your stuff? Like, it's very competitive.
Yeah, it's tough to get noticed for sure. So you seem like you're so busy that I don't understand how you actually have time to have a full-time job. Or if, and that being said, since you do have a full-time job, I don't see how you can have a husband because you never see them. But of one of the many things that you do, I see you do a podcast called the Artsy Raven. And what's the podcast all about?
So that podcast, basically I interview writers and I ask them about their tips and techniques. And so I interview like a lot of different types of writers. And I kind of stopped that for now after my grandma died and my mom died. But basically, it was just a sort of way to give back to the writing community. It's sort of like, to sort of learn the craft a bit more. Like, I think people don't realize how hard it is to write. So by talking to writers and asking them, how do you do it? Like, what are the tricks? And, like, how do you process this? I mean, in a way, selfishly, it also makes me sort of learn what they're doing. So maybe it'll help me improve my craft too. So it's just to open a conversation, sort of what you guys are doing, right? So
that's exactly what we're doing. We learn quite a bit just talking to all these different authors, and it's our way of giving back to the author community too. It's just having you guys come on here and talk a bit about yourself and get you a bit more recognition. So yeah, and that's the beautiful thing that I've discovered over the last 4 or 5 years now. It's almost 5 years, Dave, I think. September 2017, I first dipped my toe in there, and especially the independent community they're so helpful. Like, it's not a competition at all. We're all here to help each other out, and I've received so much help from everybody. David was the first one who stepped in and helped me out when I was trying to figure out Amazon. So Dave is actually the first person that I hadn't known David at all up to that point, and I was quite blown away by how helpful a lot of authors are. You think they're struggling to get their name shown, and yet they take the time out to help you get yours known. So, yeah, no, that's what we do here at Lurking for Legends, is just trying to give you a bit more exposure as well. So, yeah, I certainly feel that.
yeah, sometimes you just have to ask, right? And then you'll be surprised.
Exactly. Yes, that's for sure. And there's so much knowledge out there, and there's so much to know too. It's so overwhelming sometimes, but I just take it one day at a time, and we'll get through it. But so you also do a thing. This is. I just want to ask you, actually. Sorry, let me rephrase that. What is East meets West speculative fiction? What does that actually mean?
Well, I mean, I read a lot when I was younger, so a lot of the books that I read, like, the publishers obviously are not very diverse. So while growing up, I didn't really find too many Asian characters and whatnot. So East meets West is something I made up after I wrote a vampire book, which featured both, featured a diversity of characters. The main character is Asian. And while I was shopping around for an agent and publisher, I was told that vampires are only European. And I'm just like, that's not true. But, so I sort of made up the East meets sort of catchphrase because I was just astonished, right? I was like, but it's not true. Like, a lot of different cultures have vampires, but it's just sort of presented differently, right? So there is a history of, Chinese vampires. I mean, they were more practical. Like, they weren't just out. Like, they weren't, some of them, it was because a Taoist priest wanted to move them home, right? So basically, people might be working in the west end of China, and then they died on the east end. So the Taoist priests would transport these corpses at night by giving them some energy. And then at night, they would hop their way home. And then, if they got loose, then they start biting people, and they're considered vampires. But they're sort of brainless, I guess, like zombies. But that's sort of one, where the idea comes from, right? Like, those are vampires, but sort of different. And then there's also vampires in the Philippines that, fly around and stuff like that. So I think every culture has sort of a similar monsters, but sort of like how you present it, right? How you make it up. So when I finished the vampire book, I called it like a East meets West, since it talks about like a main character who's Asian, but her family immigrated to, I think originally it was Toronto, but then I changed it to Manhattan, hoping it'll sell. But anyhow, then they came to North America, so it's sort of like East meets West kind of idea. So.
That's very interesting. I noticed, and I like, it's good to see that. I see a lot more diversity in the things that we're watching now on TV as well. I see it with the Wheel of Time, and and it's funny. I think sometimes, and it's probably true in all cultures, but we get so enwrapped that the world revolves around us that we don't see the bigger picture. We're in any part of the world, any kind of fiction will be generally written from that point of view. So I would imagine, in Asia, that there'd be maybe not a lot of white Americans or white Canadians or whatever in there, because you wouldn't envision their characters that way, because that's not your culture. And I think it's a little short-sighted of any of us to think that that character is only specific to that part of the world, because
Yeah, it depends where you're from. Like I grew up with all these like Asian horror movies, and there's like, oh gosh, they always pick like this, a Caucasian vampire, and I think they must have picked the guy off the street
Wow.
because he's like can't act or anything, but he's like the token like person that looks different, right? So, but a lot of my stories, I do have Asian characters, but sometimes if I take them out, I find they sell better. Like if it's just a generic character, and I won't mention. But at the same time, like, oh, that takes something away from them because I can't really explore it more deeply. But it depends on the editor and the publisher. So it depends on who's buying it, I guess, if anyone's buying it. So
Yeah, yeah, and for sure, I guess there is something to be said about that. If you're actually trying to sell your books, unfortunately, especially if you live in the Western Hemisphere, our biggest market is the U.S. So we cater to the U.S. Readers. That's our livelihood, whether you like it or not. And a lot of us will change to American spelling and everything else. So I guess to each their own, but we all have to find our way for sure. So again, going back to how busy you actually are, why do you volunteer work in the writing community when other writers tell you you're wasting your time and not writing?
yes, I've been told that a lot. Well, part of it is because I don't see that much diversity in the leadership in some of the writing communities. So I stopped by stepping up. They'll bring other people to volunteer, and also for me to learn. I think it's a chance to network as well, build some street cred. Hopefully, one day I'll meet an agent, that sort of thing. But I mean, in the long run, it's really just to help the community and to learn. Actually, I was pulling together a Asian literary festival when one of the writer guests, who's male, was asking me why was I doing this, because at the time I couldn't my husband couldn't pick up my son for some reason, so I had to bring this 3-year-old with me, and he's just sitting there playing with his toys, but he's just like, you should concentrate on being a mother. And I'm just looking at him, I'm like, if I was a man, would you say the same thing? But I'm just like, look, I'm trying to build like a better world for him, and I think by volunteering and sharing my time with people and building a community, that hopefully one day he'll see more works, more publications by more diverse people. So
I noticed that you were involved in an anthology with the intriguing title Trump, Utopia or Dystopia.
oh
Can you
god,
tell us a little about that?
you know what, that book came out of a lot of anger. Around the time when Trump was being elected, my father suddenly died. And I remember looking at the screen and just being pissed. And I was like, but I was like, okay, I need to do something. Because I was having a big mental health crisis at that point. And I was like, okay, I need to focus my energy somewhere because I was on a downward spiral. So I thought, you know what, let's do an anthology. And actually at the same time, it was Canada's 150th coming up, right? So I also opened a submission call for Canada 150, but no one wanted to write about Canada. I think I got like maybe 10 stories, and then I had to write to my friends and beg them to write stories about Canada. But for the Trump book, there was over 100 entries, so there was a lot to go through. But people loved writing about him. Even this one person, I met him at a literary event. He was like, I really want to give you a story. I hate his guts, which is why I'm going to write you a story. And I was like, all right. And he wrote a really good story, actually, that ended up in the book. But it was just, I don't know. He's so fascinating. He's almost like larger than life. Like he doesn't seem like a real person. He's like a comic book character, right? And you're like, how can you do all this stuff and get away with it? And actually, I'm preparing to release another Trump book. So one of the writers that gave me a story, Maureen Barr, is a feminist science fiction scholar based in New York, and she's a professor as well. But she has not stopped writing about him. She keeps going about how much she hates him. So she wrote a short story for this Trump anthology. And then she wrote another book and sold it to a feminist press in the US. And then she wrote another book about him. So we'll be releasing a book of short feminist stories probably in the next few months from her about Trump. But the Trump anthology, working with Jen Frankel, I'm actually quite proud of the book. I know a lot of people think it's a weird thing, but some of the stories in it were actually quite lovely. Like some of it was okay, fine, he's sort of like the devil, you know, it's pretty standard. And then other ones are silly poetry, where he's like a toddler asking for things to be done. And then there were other stories where it was kind of sad. One of my favorite ones is when he actually gets shot at a McDonald's while walking through the drive-through, and then he turns into a robot, and then people could program him and control him, and he's just so sad. Like, there's a variety of different stories in it that are quite fascinating. And one of them is quite scary, about people self-mutilating themselves to get likes, to prove how American you are. That, you know, you just flog yourself, and, you know, the more pain you show, the more American you are. And it's such a crazy concept. At the same time, you're like, oh my God, that could actually happen too. So I don't know, a very, very different book, very different anthology. So.
I was going to bring up this from one of the viewers. He says, I noticed on your website you have links to both Grammarly and the Hemingway app. I love using the Hemingway app, but have always wondered if Grammarly Pro has more to offer. What are your pros and cons with each, and would you recommend paying for the Grammarly upgrade to Pro?
Both of them are great apps, but I think it depends on how much writing you do. Like, when you think about investing and stuff, I mean, I grew up in an immigrant family, so we're kind of frugal. So, like, if you use it a lot, then definitely, I think it does help you improve your writing. But I mean, there's still AIs, like, they're not perfect, right? You're still going to have to end up correcting your manuscript at the end. But both are great. And I think, you know, if you use both, then yeah, you'll catch more things. But it depends how much time you have. Like, and also what kind of computer you have. Like, mine is like starting to get old, so I don't think Grammarly actually stopped working on my computer. So when I get a new computer, I'll install it again. But writing tools are great, but, you know, it depends how much writing you do.
So what would be your favorite writing tool then?
Oh gosh, you know what? I just use Word. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't, and I have notebooks that I write in as well. So for writing it, yeah, that's another good one actually. I've tried that one as well. So those ones, they catch a lot of your errors, but I mean, at the end of the day, you're the one that still has to come up with the material, right? So for a while, I was using Scrivener. That's very good for planning things if you want. But then at the end, I just got lazy. I just have a notebook. I write down my ideas, and then I sit down and I just start writing. At the end of the day, you just have to just start. Unfortunately, there's no secret. I think I found on April Fool's Day, was it last year or the day before? Readsy was like, oh, we have this secret software. All it'll help you write your book. And then when you got there and you clicked on it, they're like, ha ha ha. This is an April Fool's joke. So yeah.
So, in amongst all of your extremely busy schedule, you run your own indie publishing company.
I didn't want to be a publisher, but yes, I do.
So I was just wondering, what do you look for in submissions to your company?
I guess, you know what? I'm a kind of a quirky person, so I like things that surprise me. And it's kind of horrible being a publisher because you're a writer. I'm a writer too, right? So then when I read stuff, you're like, oh, okay, I saw that one coming. You know what I mean? Like, I like things that surprise me, that have genuine depth, that I can connect with the characters, stuff like that. I mean, I know it sounds terrible, but like, I know like there are readers out there, but like, it's so subjective, all this like editing stuff, right? Like, you like things you like, and might not necessarily be other people. So, so if I like something, I like something. I don't know what else to say. But it depends how much energy I have, right? Like, I'm a small publisher. I can only do a couple of books a year. So I'm not open all the time because I'm working, I'm doing other things, right? And as other writers say, I should be concentrating on writings and whatnot. But I find for publishing, I mean, I started the company because I couldn't find a publisher. And I thought, it's such a shame. There's so many good writers out there that aren't being given a chance, right? Like, I may be a small publisher, but at least you can get the credit and then you can build on it, right? Like, it's just I view myself as a stepping stone. Because, I mean, I'm not like, a penguin that has like $1 million to do all the marketing, right? So I view myself as a small indie publisher that offers writers a chance to step up. So.
So I'm assuming that's the Dark Helix Press, correct?
Yes.
And where did Dark Helix come from? Is that something to do with your nuclear biology, or?
Yeah, for DNA. DNA. There's a raven on top of a double helix, so that's sort of the logo I came up with. Yeah. But I didn't. Well, then someone told me, because I've started doing some children's books as well. They're like, that's kind of not a nice sounding name for kids' books, and I was like, oh, too late. But yeah.
That might be a bit off-putting. So, what exactly do you do as a publisher? Obviously, you help someone publish their book, but like, what do you do as Dark Helix Press? If I was to submit my book to you, what would the steps be, and what would happen for me?
Well, I mean, I'll probably have a quick look at it and let you know whether or not I take it or not take it. I'm not really open to submissions at the moment, but people still send it in anyways. Like Maureen's book, she sent it in anyways. And then I looked at it and I was like, okay, I think this is worth doing. But as a indie press, I can't afford to do the traditional contracts, right, where you pay someone a few $1,000s or whatever. So we do revenue splitting typically. So I'll give people contracts, then we work on the book by editing, everything. So it goes back and forth. And I think for Maureen's book, we've edited for over 1.5 years now, because she works too, right? So we both work. So it takes a while to get a book out. Average around 2-3 years. Right, by the time you're done. And then I also do all the cover work, all the promotional materials. I set up events, so readings for the authors to do virtually or in person. So a lot of promo stuff, a lot of marketing stuff, I think. And yeah, and just help them, get their book out there as best as I can.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, you also, I understand you have an MBA in marketing, which sounds like an amazing achievement. Many of us struggle with marketing, so I was just wondering, do you have any kind of helpful tips?
Marketing, oh my gosh. It's actually very hard. I mean, I know it sounds like so, like, oh, it sounds so easy. You just do marketing. But you know what? There are a lot of, you can throw away a lot of money very quickly. I think when people do it, they might not necessarily measure the ROI, the return on investment. So, just because you don't do a Facebook ad doesn't mean people will buy it, right? And it depends on what you expect, right? And the whole viral stuff is just so random. That's like winning the lottery too, right? Like, just because you do make a video, it doesn't necessarily mean it might go random 6 years later, 7 years later, right? Who knows? But for marketing, I'll say do your research, put together a budget, and think about how much you can afford, and lower your expectations. I think because you don't want to be disappointed, right? And also talk to other indie authors, as Richard mentioned, because oh my gosh, indie authors can go on and on about marketing because they do a lot of it, right? Compared to, like, if you're published by a traditional publisher, usually there's a team that does it. But I mean, these days, I mean, let's be honest, like, budgets are getting smaller. Even those people will ask you to do some of the marketing yourself. So it doesn't matter if you're traditionally published or self-published. And if you see any people doing events, ask if you can join. I mean, you know what? The worst they can do is say no. Honestly, like, you can ask, and if they say no, they say no. That's okay. But maybe they'll remember you for a different event, right? So you never know. And I think maybe generally be nice to people. I mean, you shouldn't, like, don't. I mean, there are some people that take the route of being controversial, right, as part of their marketing, I guess. But if you can dish it out, you're gonna have to take it too, right? So, yeah, the RC Raven is a newsletter email list which I put together. It was sort of part of the podcast, but it's also a thing on its own where I was doing once a month newsletters. So I email people about all the latest things I'm doing, and I talk a little bit about art as well, anything I find interesting. So that is a marketing strategy where I, so to set it up, it's free, but you also have to remember you're putting time into it, right? So, I mean, a lot of people don't value their time, but doing that actually has increased my emailing list a lot, because I kept hearing a lot about emailing lists, but then I never really did anything, because it takes time, right? But then once I learned about these platforms you can use to sort of give away things, give away your short stories and whatever, and build an email list. So I'm using Story Origin mostly right now, and wow, it really ramped up all the emails that I've been collecting. So that's one marketing strategy. So a lot of the marketing things doesn't have to be free, but sometimes when you pay a little bit, I think it's worth it. Like Canva, where you can use to make social graphic tiles, is free, but you can pay for the pro version. It's $10 a month, or $10 US a month, right? But then you have to think about, is it worth it, right? So you can try it. Some things you can try out for free, and if you like it, then pay into it. But don't pay into it right away, because otherwise you're going to be, using up a lot of your budget quite quickly. And it depends what your goal is. Like, are you trying to build your email list? Are you trying to just build a presence? Are you just trying to get a website going? So you have to think about what you're doing. I think planning is probably one of the more important things before you do the marketing. Plan about what you want to do first.
So I know you touched on Ricepaper magazine and what we're talking about earlier. You're deputy editor of Ricepaper magazine. Tell us a bit more about the magazine itself.
So Ricepaper magazine was started actually in the 50s and the 60s by Jim Wong Chu. So he's an early pioneer of Asian Canadian writing and publishing. And it started off as a newsletter, actually, like just a photocopied newsletter that he would hand out to people. And then over time, it became a print magazine. But I believe as grants were drying up, it became an online magazine. But it's still one place where Asian Canadians or any Asian people writing in English can go and publish their stuff. It's not a paying gig anymore. I remember before it was paying, but then grants got tighter and we couldn't meet whatever criteria it was. So it's a place for Asian Canadians to gather and send their stories and poems and discuss things. So we wanted to keep it as a safe space to sort of promote our work. And it's still running. I mean, it's a volunteer organization, as I mentioned. And there were bigger ones. I think the only other ones were like in the US, I think called ACWW. So they also have a website where you can send your writing and stuff like that. And there's another one, I believe, in Hong Kong and Singapore as well. So there are actually very few places for English language pieces by Asians to be sent. So this is one of them, is Ricepaper. And we also do interviews with filmmakers. We interview actors and people of the Asian community as well. So it was a way to give back as well. And I admit it. Well, as a first generation Canadian, at first I didn't want to be typecast as being an Asian Canadian writer, but then over time I'm like, oh, whatever. It's another opportunity for me to volunteer and help out in a community, right? Because I understand, like, we're all embarrassed to be Asian because we, like when we go to school, we're like, oh God, why do I have rice? Why can't I have the bologna sandwich? But, over time I embrace my identity and, I learned to live with it. So.
Yeah, it's a shame with our society that you should feel embarrassed. You should, we're all people, and I think that's the bottom line. But so with this Ricepaper magazine, where can people actually find it if they're looking to read it? And do there physical copies, or is it just online now?
It's all online now. So ricepapermagazine.ca. And then occasionally we do anthologies. So every couple of years, we pick the best pieces from the website and we publish anthologies. So Belief was one that we did last year. We pulled together some pieces because we found some money through grants. And then we published a physical copy through Dark Helix Press. And we did readings and, and interviews with the authors and stuff like that.
Yeah, I believe you're doing a creative writing course at Ryerson. Is that correct?
Oh, I finished that. Yeah. So like at the universities in Toronto, like all of them have it. It's a continuing education course where you can do some certificates. So I had wanted to do an MFA, but my husband told me I wasn't allowed since I already have an MBA. He said I'm being overeducated. So I settled for the certificate. But I think it's important once in a while, if you can afford it, because these things cost money to sit down and learn. about different writing techniques from people and your professors. And one of them I still keep in touch with. She has her own newsletter, and she was a guest on the Artsy Raven as well. So it's nice. The ones, I mean, you don't need that many to get the certificate, right? And it's another thing to add to your resume. I think it was like I think I did only 4 courses, and then you get a certificate. I mean, it's a very low bar, but I feel like I wish I should have done more classes. I mean, I don't know. I just like going to school at the end of the day, I think. Like, this doesn't matter. So.
And would you recommend something like that to other authors?
Oh, definitely. Like I said, if you can afford it. But there's also, there's so many things that you can take out there. Like Clarion West is a group that does a lot of online classes. I think One Story also does a lot of online classes. It depends on what you want. Like those things are all virtual. But like I need to be in person. I need someone to tell me how horrible my writing is to my face. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll do something to change. Like, I don't know. I fall asleep with a lot of the virtual stuff. Like I'm just bad with virtual because it's too easy to ignore people, right? So yeah, but in person is definitely better if you can do a class.
Usually my wife tells me if my writing's bad.
My husband doesn't read my stuff. He doesn't like speculative fiction. He doesn't like horror. He's a documentary guy. He's a nonfiction guy. So. Yeah, but you're lucky your wife reads your stuff. Even if I gave them money, they wouldn't read my stuff.
So, listening to you talk about everything that you do, I'm kind of feeling a big underachiever over here, down here in Cambridge. So, and listening to you, I'm starting to think they must be more hours on the clocks in Toronto. Like, are your days longer than they are in Southern Ontario or Northern Ontario? I think right in the middle there, Toronto, because it's such a big city, must have a bigger clock or something.
No, but I mean, I think I do so much. It's like we were talking earlier before all this, but like I have chronic depression, and it's my way of dealing with it because I was never allowed to get help while growing up because it didn't exist. So, well, I mean, it exists, but my family was not willing to let me get help. So to deal with it, I sort of overdo things. I don't know if it makes sense. I need to be busy or else my mind starts going downwards. So I just need to constantly do something all the time and just keep myself occupied. But I admit, like, yeah, then after a while I burn out and then, then I have to reset, right? But it's just, I don't know. That's just how I cope with my mental illness.
So on your podcast, I was just wondering if you could pick kind of 3 ultimate ideal guests to be on your podcast, who would you pick and why?
Oh gosh, I'd pick Stephen King. I love Stephen King. I don't know. He's like the hardworking, most hardest working writer in the business. I think, he has a lot to share. Another one is, well, I guess I would be curious about J.K. Rowling. Like, I mean, I'm not like a huge Harry Potter fan, but I am curious as to how fame has affected her. And, she has other different projects now and how she feels about that. Like, I mean, her other projects are not going to, obviously, I mean, compared to Harry Potter, it's not going to be as big, but like where she finds the drive to just keep going. Oh gosh. And then third person, I guess I'll have to be Margaret Atwood because she's Canadian and I want to listen to her talk. She's such an intelligent person. Like you can just talk to her for hours, I think. So those are my top 3 guests. But they will not, I'm too small, potatoes. But anyhow, I can dream, I guess.
I'm sure they'd want to come on to Lurking for Legends.
Of course, yeah. Let me know when Margaret Atwood comes and J.K. Rowling. Okay.
So I see we're coming to the end of the show here, and I think that I speak for both Dave and myself when I say you certainly have accomplished a great deal, especially juggling the full-time job on top of it. It's it's credits and kudos to you for doing everything that you've done. It's quite amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you guys are amazing too. I mean, you guys, have written a lot and, have a broadcast and you guys have supported people around you. I think it's fantastic.
that certainly helps. And yeah, my wife's the same as David said. My wife doesn't like fantasy, but she reads my stuff just so she can help me proofread it and make my stories a little bit better. And Dave has the same support up in his neck of the woods too, and it's certainly very helpful. It's nice to get actually an independent set of eyes on my stuff. So she's not a fantasy reader, so she picks out things that a lot of people wouldn't, which is very nice.
My wife, I tell you this, my wife had never even seen a science fiction show before I met her. So it's like everything she knows about science fiction is kind of secondhand through me, through me introducing her to shows and movies and then eventually my writing and everything. But yeah, she hadn't even seen a science fiction show, but she is incredibly supportive and I'm very lucky to have her.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way, since my family isn't that supportive, I find my support in the community and the volunteer work I do, right? So yeah, as long as you find people around you to rally for you, it'll give you the energy to keep going on your writing journey.
So I hopefully I didn't screw that up. I tried to type in your website there. I'm normally not very good at doing that, and I guess I must have missed it, but I'll get it in there in a minute. So when people are looking for JF Garrard's, and I know I'm saying your name wrong, but when people are looking for your books, where can they find them?
I'm on Amazon mainly, but jfgarrard.com is my website because some of the stuff is published through magazines. Some are free, some are not, but that's the best place to go to find all the things that I write and where they are.
And what is coming down the pipe for you?
Well, I just finished up a project for the Malaysian High Commission. I think that's the Canadian Embassy in Malaysia. So for Asian Heritage Month in May there, I was commissioned to write an essay about pioneers of Asian Canadian writers. So I did a big essay for them. And I finished a new book where I'm trying to find an agent. It's a East meets West book about demon hunting in San Francisco. So I picked San Francisco because around the 1800s, right after the gold rush and the whole building of the railways, in a way, that's probably one of the most racist times of our history. It's like all the bad things seem to happen around then, right? Because there's lawless, right? So I wrote a book, and I'm trying to find a publisher. So that's going to take a while. I think I'm going to maybe try to find an agent and who knows? I think I'll give it a year or two, and then if it doesn't happen, then I'll self-publish it, right? So we'll see.
I thought it was quite ironic when you said Demon Hunter and then finding an agent at the same time. It almost seems like I've had issues. I've had dealings and issues with agents before, and it's almost like hunting demons when you're trying to find one. So, and I don't speak for all of the agents. I'm sure there's some awesome agents out there. I just haven't found one yet, but. Anyway, I wish you luck, and we're glad that you came on our show. Thank you for being here. And David, what's happening in the David Kelly universe?
Well, I have now got the second Logan Two Feathers book back from my editor. I've still not been brave enough to open the actual document and see all the wording, but I have actually got the edits back from her, so I'm going to be starting work on her feedback. And the other good news I've had today is that my local tire company has got a new set of tires for my Corvette, which I was kind of like not sure I was going to be able to get.
Yeah, they're tough to get. I tried to get them before. I actually went down to the Bowling Green. That was totally off topic. Sorry, JF, but I went right down to Bowling Green where they actually make the Corvette. And I tried to get tires for my car, and they did not have them. I had to come back to Cambridge to get them, so it's very bizarre. But anyway, next week.
What about you, Richard?
Sorry, I have nothing really new. I haven't been writing much in the last couple of weeks. I've had so much pulling at me. I just did a book event where I had a bunch of local authors attend this little book signing on Sunday, and it was what it was. We didn't have great attendance, but it was nice just to getting out again with some more authors, some more like-minded people, and just hanging with your tribe, so to speak. So I enjoyed that. I wish we would have had a bit more traffic go through there, so the authors could have sold some more books. But As far as the writing, I'm dealing with my income taxes and stuff like that now too, and that's such a pain that I do not feel like writing at all. So hopefully I'll get back on track next week, and we'll get this.
But the tax return's almost as inventive as writing fiction.
It is. It's actually more. I think it's more horror than fantasy, so I don't enjoy doing it at all. But anyway, next week we're going to have science fiction and fantasy artist Christopher Dahl, and I believe that is someone you brought in, is it not, Dave?
Yeah, Chris, he's a great guy, and he does some phenomenal artwork, so that will be a real treat.
Yeah, it's going to be a real treat for my bank account too. So Christopher's been featured on the cover of a number of books, including Becky Chambers' Hugo Award-winning Wayfarer series by HarperCollins US. He also runs a weekly live stream on Twitch, which I guess I've heard of Twitch, but I've never seen it, where he paints a science fiction scene live. So that might be interesting. I might have to check that out before he comes on. So, and again, thanks a lot, Dave. There was my budget. So for Christy, who couldn't be here with us tonight, Dave and myself, we hope everyone has a safe and healthy week ahead. And until we meet again, take good care.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.